So let's do one rosary of Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum, as you know, is the mantra of compassion. So compassion is that wish to remove the suffering of others. And I say this each week, and I remind all of us, including myself, of this. It's very good to simply recite Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. But if we actually think about compassion, this is the mantra of compassion, and if we actually think about removing the suffering of others, then this mantra recitation becomes not maybe some mystical, esoteric, karmic imprint upon our mind stream that might eventually help us in some way, but it actually is being used to cultivate that attitude of compassion, that wish to remove the suffering of others. And if we go further than that, and if we actually imagine that in our wish to remove the suffering of others, we imagine that we're doing so, that we are actually taking on the suffering of others, that we are extinguishing that flame of self-cherishing that we can visualize in our hearts by assuming the suffering of others, then we're really acting upon this idea of compassion. It's not just the wish to assume, but it's some kind of effort to take upon ourselves, remove but take upon ourselves the suffering of others, and thereby diminish that basis for all our unhappiness, all our suffering, which is self-grasping and the self-cherishing that comes out of self-grasping. So imagine that you are assuming the suffering of others, and you can imagine that you are providing others with all that they need, that they wish for. As you breathe out, you provide from your store of merit, from your virtue, from whatever the effects of any virtue that you've engaged in. You provide others with that. And you can think about these things, realizing that as much as you give, if you imagine that you have this store of merit, as you provide it to others, this only increases your store of merit. It's not a zero sum. It's a win-win. And think about that. Actually, the mutually beneficial quality of engaging in this. And as I think I said last week, when we engage in virtue in this way, imagining that we are assuming the suffering of others and imagining that we are providing them with what they need, this virtuous thought, the effects of this, it's not that we can actually see that, in a month we will have gained this amount of virtue or merit, and in a year, the interest is compounded to such an extent that there's no way of actually seeing the effects. However, a little virtuous action is said to bear enormous fruit. It's hard to even see the relationship between that small positive effort and the large result of that. So this is the visualization that you can engage in as you recite Om Mani Padme Hum. So we'll begin. Om Mani Padme Hum, 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 Om Mani Padme Hum. Mani Padme Hum. So before we recited this generating bodhicitta prayer with the wish to free all beings. So we engage in this recitation of Mani Padme Hum with this wish to free all beings, free them of their suffering. I shall always go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha until I reach full enlightenment. Inspired by wisdom and compassion, today in the Buddha's presence, I generate the mind intent on full awakening. In order to most skillfully help others, we have to attain a state of awakening, a state of enlightenment. And so for the sake of others, in order to most effectively help them, we determine to attain enlightenment. We generate the mind that is intent on full awakening for the benefit of all sentient beings. And then we vow to remain here to help until all sentient beings have found freedom from suffering. So this generating bodhicitta prayer that we recite is really important. It's the essence of the motivation with which we should engage in life. And is this working properly?
Yes.
It's, you've all come here, and the main purpose for coming here is this. And of course we make our way here, but we have to remind ourselves of this constantly. The generation of bodhicitta is something that we should do over and over. And of course we have to actually act upon it as well, but reminding ourselves of this commitment to not just to help others, but to work towards the attainment of a state where we can most beneficially help others. That's the most compassionate way in which we can act upon this desire to help others. Okay, so the interesting thing about this book that we're discussing, Secular Ethics for the New Millennium, is that His Holiness is attempting to convey a spiritual path, convey a spiritual way of life, free of any kind of religiosity, any kind of dogma, any belief systems that someone might not be able to believe in. And in a sense, I think that there's great value in presenting a spiritual path in a way that, or forcing oneself to present a spiritual path in a way that doesn't depend on any kind of faith, any kind of sort of hook to a dogma, a belief system. You forcing oneself to actually recognize the logic in behaving a certain way, the logic in working towards cultivating a certain attitude or way of life, makes your commitment to that way of life all the stronger, because it's not based on some kind of a belief system that is in any way blind. It's totally dependent on one's having scrutinized and seen the value of that particular way of practicing, behaving. Okay, so according to my notes, we got to the end of page 43. Is that? So there's a whole little assortment of, what's this one?
Hot water.
Ah. Excuse me. So, you know, we're meant to, if I have hot water, of course, I'm doing it to quench my thirst. But if I can think in some way, may this in some way help me along as I work towards developing a better understanding, then the act of drinking becomes far more vast. It becomes beneficial. It becomes a virtuous act. I mean, we're tricking ourselves. I'm drinking because I am thirsty. But if I can think a little bit, what Rinpoche used to say, just imitate.
Just yes.
Okay, so we begin on page 44. So we've been discussing how things exist. And last week we really focused on in terms of Buddhist philosophical schools, the Madhyamika Svatantrika and the Madhyamika Prasangika. And the difference is really whether, well, using the example of when there is a coiled rope in a corner, in a dark corner, that we think is a snake, whether that rope has an element of ropeness that exists inherently in it, that makes it not a snake, that there is a quality from the side of the object when we perceive it, then when we see it as a snake, that if when we see it as a snake and it is not a snake, there's a snakeness lacking there, which makes our imputation of it as a snake wrong. While according to the Prasangika view, you can call it anything you want. There's no lack of there's no snakeness to a snake, ropeness to a rope. The elements that make up a rope, if we agree to call that a rope, we agree to call that a rope. But never do the elements come together in such a way that when we perceive them, there is a quality of ropeness there. That's what we were discussing last week here. Now, His Holiness introduces us to a different set of examples to indicate that an object, and in this case he's talking about himself, is not inherently, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, is not inherently, part of his inherent being is not, there is no particular quality. You can't say that his being a monk is part of his, what the makeup that makes him, from his side, inherently the Dalai Lama. And he plays with us, talking about the different titles or names or attributions that he possesses. Being a monk, being a Tibetan, being from from Amdo, province of Tibet. And each of these may help define him, but given the fact that they are all separate aspects or labels, it's not that they are in any kind of intrinsic way who he is. And the more we can use little thoughts such as this to break down our idea of what something is, the more our attachment to some idea of something diminishes. So, on the top of 44, we also find that the very concept of self is relative. Here, consider the fact that we often find ourselves in situations where we blame ourselves. We say, oh, on such and such a day, I really let myself down. And we speak of, so we have the me today looking at the me of that other day and say, and judging it in some way. And we speak of feeling angry with ourselves. This would suggest that there are in fact two distinct selves, the one which is wrong and the one which criticizes. The former is a self understood in relation to a particular experience or event. The latter is understood from a perspective of the self as a generality. I, at this moment. Yet even though it makes sense to have an internal dialogue like this, still there's only one continuum of consciousness at any given moment. So as we think, oh, I really screwed up the other day when I did that, the only I that we can really say is me is the one right now. Similarly, we can see that the personal identity of a single individual has many different aspects. In my own case, for example, there is a perspective, a perception of a self that is a monk, of a self that is Tibetan, of a self that is from the Amdo region of Tibet, and so on. Some of these selves predate others. For instance, the self which is Tibetan existed before the self that is a monk. I did not become a novice until I was 7 years old. The self which is a refugee has only existed since 1959. In other words, on one single basis, there are many designations. They are all Tibetan since that self or identity existed at my birth. But they're all nominally different. To me, this is further reason to have doubts about the inherent existence of a self. We cannot therefore say that any one characteristic is what finally constitutes myself, or, on the other hand, is the sum of them. For even if I were to relinquish one or more, the sense of I would still continue. Okay, let's discuss this. So I'd love your views on, or different examples of how we can do this.
I'm curious about this time aspect of the self that we just described is, well, although they're all Tibetan, Brunsky says that it says that self, which is a refugee, has only existed since 1959. And that there was so what I'm trying to wonder is how things, there was something that interested me that you mentioned earlier that had to do with merit, essentially. And that if you, strive to reduce the suffering of others, then this is a way of gaining merit. But then, is that something, excuse me for a second, because I'm not really trained in this, but so merit then is something that one accumulates? It's similar to the experiences the self undergoes, and the self changes through time by being exposed to different things. In other words, the self, before having undergone the experience of becoming a refugee, is different. I mean, but it still exists, I suppose.
So we're looking for whether an actual self exists.
Okay.
And we can see that if we, from one point of view, there's the self of you when you walked in here this evening. There's the self of you when we began reciting the prayers. There's the self of you now. Are they the same self? How are they? They're all John.
Well, that's simply a sort of, simply for the convenience of thought, you sort of gather, at least this is the way I see it, gather them all under this sort of rubric, and we could give a name to it, all of these phenomena that are very complex, and many of them ephemeral, but some of them apparently, like bad habits seem to be persistent. So, I don't know, but I'm very interested in this.
So, exactly.
So and each moment of, let's say, John, from this morning to now, becomes the cause of the next moment, which becomes the cause of the next moment. So it's a cause, the effect depends on the cause, and from one point of view we can even say that in order for something to be a cause there has to be an effect, so the cause depends on the effect. And I say that because some Buddhist schools would say, how can something prior to something else be the effect of the something that happens afterwards? And here the relationship of dependence is not timely in the cause-effect sense. It's dependent in a more subtle aspect of interdependence, which is that in order for something to be a cause, there has to be an effect. A cause being a cause is dependent on its bringing about an effect, right? So these are ways of breaking down the whole idea of some entity that is there. So going on to the your question, which was the self that existed as the Tibetan, and then when the Tibetan becomes a monk, that at age 7, added to that definition is the fact that the Tibetan is a monk, added to, in 1959, that Tibetan who is a monk becoming a refugee. So what is your question? Where's the problem?
No, I was just, much a question as,
You had some question about merit.
Oh, sorry. Merit.
So in this process, every time we engage in virtue, we accrue, there's some quality of positivity that then accompanies this continuum. And every time we engage in harm of others or seeking pleasure at the sake of others, some non-virtue becomes part of that continuum.
that accumulates, the non-virtue accumulates as well.
Yeah.
Yes, but merit can be used up.
Yeah.
Huh?
But non-virtue can like be purified, I guess. Is that the equivalent?
Maybe. Person translates merit as positive potential.
So I think thinking of it as like, if we do one thing, it increases the likelihood we're going to do it again.
Positive attention?
Potential.
Potential, yes.
So it's not like you get a merit badge or something.
But surely it's not some kind of counseling. Oh,
It's a bank.
so that,
It's like a credit.
that I just
No, it's not, no.
As Tony says, it gains, the interest rates are very good, both in the positive direction and in the negative direction. But it's not as if, the interesting thing about it, as I understand it, is that it's not as if you have a, you can check your balance. It's not as if there's a balance. You have the bless you. You have each action has its own little potency that accompanies you. So you have all these negative ones going, and you have all these positive ones going, and whoever talked about this, they grow, and they grow even if you don't actually engage them. They sort of fester, let's say, the positive and the second and the negative. Unless we work at countering the negative, at dissolving the negative, or at cultivating the positive.
I can certainly see that in terms of, for instance, positive action often encourages positive action from other people. And so and likewise, if something negative is done, that can encourage negative behavior.
So,
Positive action causes positive, a positive atmosphere, brings about positive reactions, and that positivity on some level accompanies us from moment to moment, from year to year, from decade to decade. And so as Mark said, if we see it as positive potential, it is pushing us in a positive direction. And that potential, that positive momentum accompanies us from life to life, as does the negative. Not only does it is it responsible for our attitude in our next life, as it is responsible for our attitudes tomorrow, next month, next year, next decade, but it also affects our physical being as well as our environment, so that the environment that we experience is said to be the result of our actions in the past. Our environment, our community, the way people behave towards us, the whole atmosphere within which we are born is the result of our past actions, body, speech, and mind. So I'm a believer. Is that I've just revealed my cards here. Does anyone want to add something to this? Does our state of health is all the result of how we've behaved in the past. How does that compute with?
Well, the most foundational text on Chinese medicine from the Han Dynasty, the Yellow Emperor's Inner Canon, is one of the few foundational texts that, despite English translations, many really good English translations, remains very much over my head. It's just a very difficult text to get through, because everything is written in very vague metaphorical maxims, sort of, but it is an enormous book, but they do speak in great detail about the different corresponding spirits with every organ system, and how those correspond with different mind states and how that affects the health.
And so spirits, you said. What are spirits?
I think it really. My understanding is that it really translates as like different aspects of the psyche. So the spirit of the Hun corresponds with the liver vessel, and the emotion, even up until modern TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, the emotion that corresponds with the liver vessel is anger and frustration, but also motivation, like healthy anger as well, not just toxic rage. And so my understanding of the Hun is just sort of the neurochemistry of anger, and again, even the neurochemistry of healthy anger, like motivation and initiative.
And where does that come from? Where does Hun come from?
Where in the body or where in the texts?
No, where in life? How is one person born with more Hun than the other?
Yeah. Good question. So the liver vessel's job is to take the blood that's been produced from the adrenal system and the digestive system and journey it upwards to the head. And so the qi and blood travel together upwards to the chest and the head and all the systems that correspond to those systems. You could really divide the human population in two, to really oversimplify and say that, in half the population it rises too much, which is to say cortisol and blood and adrenaline just rise too much in this half of the population, and I would say I fall in that half of the population. And the other half, it just does not rise enough. And people are more prone to hypofunctionality of the organs, whether it's hypotension, hypothyroid, and or depression, right? It isn't rising enough. And so, there's maybe 3 or 4 people out there where it's rising the perfect amount at all times.
So how can we regulate this ourselves by our behavior?
Yeah. Well, in order to not be somebody for whom it does not raise enough, you have to have enough objective, tangible substance in the body. You have to have enough qi in blood, functional gases and blood and vital substances. You have to have enough. So those people, I think, have a bigger challenge, because I don't think, I could be told, I'm just one clinician, but I don't think theirs can raise enough through happiness alone. The diet is important, or medicinal intervention, depending on their age, depending on how strong they are, but they need substance. Because even if they're very joyous or whatever, or they think very positively, if the objective, if the tangible blood and qi is missing, it's going to be very difficult for it to rise. Hence why a lot of psychiatrists and psychologists struggle sometimes with people with depression. It's like they can really get them to understand themselves much better, but if there's like these tangible fluid substances in the body that cannot rise, it's very challenging. Whereas I think the former half of the population for whom it tends to rise too much, maybe we're more prone to stress, or more prone to anger, or more prone to any kind of overstimulating negative emotion, I think through better mental discipline and psychological temperance, that half of the population can have an easier time using the mind to modulate the physiology. I think the latter half is more challenging, but what do I know?
Well, let's hope that we're all in that other category, and that we have the ability.
Isn't this the period when Chinese history transitions from legend to history?
The Han Dynasty?
No, the emperor.
I'm not the best historian. Do any of our, does anybody?
Okay, well, so it's not relevant, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the Han Dynasty was everything for Chinese medicine. I mean, that was really the foundation when it went from a lot of shamanic experimentation and a lot of sort of like just foolhardy experimentation. Many times with their best intentions, I think. They just didn't understand physiology. And then came the Han Dynasty, and the physicians really set the foundation for what we still practice today.
Okay.
Yeah.
They codified things, that's the idea.
You mean as far as like writing texts?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
less of the
there's
metaphor, more of the straight narrative.
what's that?
Less of the metaphoric language. And
No, it was always metaphorical,
Always.
it still is. It was still always metaphorical, and that's why
Everything. That's why you hear, especially modern Chinese, even modern Chinese medicine, which is the misnomer, of course, is TCM, traditional Chinese medicine. But everything is still like, heat, cold, wind, right? You hear about wind a lot. There's no wind in the body. There's no wind blowing around. Wind is something failing to, the pathogen is moving the way wind does as a result of some fluid deficiency in the body. The fluid is not there to anchor it. The fluid can be very biomedical things. It's estrogen. Is a fluid, right? And sort of dopamine is sort of a fluid. But even the fluid concept is a metaphor because they're really referring to all these neurochemicals and these hormones. But wind especially is the one I love because people are like, what do you mean I have wind? Like wind that's not in my body, there's no wind. But it's a very significant metaphor.
It means the light in weight and moving.
It means a pathological separation of strength and anchor. And so in Chinese medicine, there's the two examples of the ultimate examples of wind. One is very whatever. It's a common cold. It's a common cold, right? The body is using its healthy substances. It's utilizing it, and you can feel in the pulse. The pulse is floating up because it's trying to fight the pathogen. And the one other example of great wind is death. Is the ultimate separation of yin and yang. There is finally no more yin, and yang just floats up, which is why when people are in hospice, a lot of people will say their family member, they get like the last 24 hours, 48 hours, they get this surge. And they're like, they're feeling really good now. They're going to die. They're going to die. So yin and yang is separated. So they have this yang surge, and they're like, he's doing really better. He's doing much worse.
My brother just died a week ago, and the doctor said he was making jokes, and then he wasn't responsible.
Yeah. But yes, it still is very metaphorical, which is a challenge for some biomedical physicians, of course, because it sounds ridiculous. It's wind. It doesn't sound very
They
scientific.
use the word wind of nickels, I think. The
Yeah.
word wong, it means the motion, right? Light in weight and moving.
It's wind, yeah. Lung is wind.
Lung, that's right, but when they define that, Jeffrey happens with the light in terms of how heavy it is and moving. It's light and it moves. That's all.
So
Not like that.
we are working towards exerting some form of control over these tendencies. And wind, for example, is associated, as you said, with anger.
Well, I was real quick. So stress and anger do, quote unquote, deplete the body fluids. And so anything that depletes that fluid reserve is going to aggravate wind. So yes.
Working towards working conscientiously towards what would you call it? Taking apart a situation in our minds so that we don't get angry, contemplating and seeing the absurdity of getting angry, seeing trying to see things from the point of view of the other person, preparing ourselves in some kind of analytical meditation before we are confronted with a provocative situation. All of those things prepare us to not be provoked in such a way that our lung, our qi, explodes. So we would consider that we have some kind of control over this, that through even simply following the breath, any kind of mindful meditation will give us the ability to act in a way that doesn't lead to lung. It takes practice and attachment, aversion, and ignorance. They talk about the chicken, the snake, and the pig. Do you have these for wind, bile, and phlegm, which are associated with attachment, aversion, and ignorance?
No. I mean, phlegm is a very big theme, but
Bile, bilic.
I think that corresponds to Ayurveda, the three doshas. Ayurveda.
Yeah, but I think they're probably in our
there
pulse as well.
there's discussion about. I mean, the bile is significant as it pertains to gallbladder pathologies, and so they say that the bitter taste in the mouth in gallbladder pathologies in Chinese medicine is literally just a byproduct of the bile rising up the digestive tract. And phlegm is an enormous theme. Yeah, that's a very important theme in China. Everything is phlegm, right? Arteriosclerosis is phlegm, right? Any form of plaque in the body is this concept of phlegm.
Do you remember which is related to ignorance and which is it related to?
The elements.
Yeah.
Bile is anger. Phlegm, I think, is ignorance.
So if we from the Tibetan medical point of view, these three things, wind, bile, and phlegm, are in our human state usually out of harmony with each other. And if we can bring our attachment, our aversion, and our ignorance, if we can diminish them and bring these elements into harmony with each other, we're healthy, we're happy. So developing patience, the antidote to anger, developing wisdom, the antidote to ignorance, developing, what's the third? Contentment, the antidote of attachment. We develop good health. So our contribution to good health would be working on these three antidotes to three afflictive emotions. And so working on ourselves in this way takes over our personality, as it were, accompanies us from moment to moment. If we develop patience, if we really think about being more tolerant, if we really think about the suffering, the difficulty that the person who's provoking us is experiencing, if we go about that analytical process before being confronted, if we're able to be more patient, we remain happier. The person who provokes us hopefully remains happier as well. All of that tendency that we have cultivated in meditation accompanies us moment by moment. That those become our habits. We create habits which affect us mentally as well as physically.
But also, with Tibetan medicine, you can take herbs that affect the energies in the body, affect those three humors, right? And then that can have a sort of bottom-up effect on one's mind also.
Oh yes, definitely take your Tibetan medicine or your Chinese medicine. But we can actually work on it ourselves without the medicine.
Lotus Holiness points out that change the physiology of the brain. Meditating on compassion, parts of the brain actually grow differently, which he proved at the University of Wisconsin lab. So non-physical things can affect physical things.
So does this talk to what you brought up? Are we on the same wavelength?
Well, I'm not sure, but that's not really important. I just wanted, I'm interested in the discussion and think about, hopefully.
Well, so we've really been talking about two things. One is trying to identify or trying to break down the idea of a self having some intrinsic permanent existence. And the other is working at cultivating the qualities of the self by the way we meditate and behave. So the fact that we can actually bring change to ourselves should also counter the idea of the self being such and such. I mean, there are people who say, I'm angry. I have an angry personality. I have a temper. That's the way I am. As if some self within our parts possess this particular characteristic and that it was fixed. No, it's not fixed. We can work on ourselves. We can diminish that. We can take Chinese medicine. We can take Tibetan medicine. We can take Valium and calming medicine, I suppose, too. So, coffee can increase our, yes.
I also really like how you tied that water example of transforming a basic act into a virtuous act, and how that instantly puts you from a place of serving self to, while you'll still get served, but now you're serving others, and that it's very effective.
So, yes, for coffee drinkers. Sorry?
Before the prayers, he wants that we came.
Come in.
Thanks a lot, appreciate it. I have to give him a copy of that immediate state, because that gives you the whole physiology. So that, go get a job at Radio City.
So I don't quite know what's happening, but gosh. So let us not forget to say our prayers at the end of class. Is that something?
You ready?
We're supposed to say our prayers.
He wants to go before.
No, we can do however you like.
Nikki's the boss, whatever you want, here, all on the side. When you say wind, birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday dear Kenny, happy birthday to you.
Thank you. So, who has a good lung for blowing out candles? We're not meant to blow out candles.
Imagine someone else's.
I know what you're going to wish for.
One to grow on. We'll leave that one grow.
Long life and healthy.
Yes.
And long life. Please stay long life.
Happy birthday.
So you probably want to do the prayers and then we'll eat.
Okay. So,
Thank you very much, Nikki. Thank you for life and shows. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
so we'll have
And many
mass
more.
next Wednesday in New Jersey at 5. Will you
No Monday class next week.
Thanks.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
What is it? Memorial. We're doing this tradition of all the Monday holidays, so somebody's gonna